I'm going to talk today about, as it says, evolution, Chesterton's fence, and Goodhart's law. And I'm actually going to start from, well, I'll just talk about how we're going to spend the time. 15 minutes or so, I'm going to just give a small lecture, so present a few concepts, and then the rest of the time I really want it to be a discussion, right? So I'll frame kind of an activity that we can try on, and then I'm hoping that we can have just a few minutes where people will think about it themselves. If we have partners, not sure if more people will show up. But yeah, you can just think about some of the problems, and then I wanted to invite you guys to give talks too. So you can edit slides. If I don't know if people brought laptops, but yeah, if you do have a laptop, you could go to the link that I'll put up this link again. You can feel free to edit slides and come up and give a talk, or just kind of go around the circle, or people can come up here, whatever we want. And then yeah, we'll just have some time to discuss. So this is a talk about evolution, but I actually want to step back a bit, and I've been coming at it from the questions of what does good technological progress look like? So what I've seen is that there's too many conflicting attitudes towards technology, right? And I've seen this kind of these two poles, right? One pole says, we can call it techno-optimism, or we could call it accelerationism, right? And this says technology is good, right? We just need to have more technology, that's more progress, more automation, right? This is just going to save us, right? If we reach AGI, we're all saved. We're all going to make it, right? But then there's this techno-pessimism view, right, on the other side. Or you can call it decelerationism or doomerism, right? And this says technology is bad, or we should proceed with caution, right? And if we reach AGI, we're actually doomed by default, right? People talk what's your p-doom? What's your probability of doom once we reach AGI? And I don't know. There's something about this that just seems okay, well, they can't both be true. In what sense might they be somewhat true, or how do we reconcile these, right? So that's my question. How do we unify these? Is there a clear way to think about positive technological progress? So that's just what I've been thinking about for a while, and my intuition, and this is going to bring us to the evolutionary part. My intuition is that there's a middle path that exists. Right? And what would this middle path say? Well, it might say something we could call it something like techno-realism, right? And we could say that it's something where the applications that we build out of this technology determine the fate that we will experience. And so the choice of what applications we build is really the important choice, right? This could be a framing that we have. AI alignment, in a sense, I could see it also kind of in the middle, right? I could see this as, if we align AGI, it could save us, but if we fail to align it, then we're doomed, right? There could be something like this. And so I don't necessarily think that AI is the solution or the problem, right? But I just think that these are tools, right? And so the intuition and the takeaway that I want to push forward is that this question is not about technology itself, it's actually about evolution, right? It's about how do we want humans to evolve, how do we see our machines evolving, how do we see that relationship evolving. And so, how can we start thinking about evolution? Well, this is one way to think about it. Back a long time ago, there were humans and there were wolves, right? And on the left, we have some cartoon of the first interactions between humans and wolves, right? And it's sort of well, there are these creatures there. We don't really know what they're about, but they're stealing our food and they're attacking people, or who knows what, how much distance do we want to keep, right? And over time, we start to see okay, well, they're actually useful to us, right? We can deploy them when we're hunting, and they can do some useful things. We have to keep them in check, right? So there's that kind of relationship. It sounds pretty similar to what we have now with AI. Okay, so, and then we see that over time, this evolved to something totally different, right? Now they're pets, and one interesting thing that I see happen here is that the individual human here is much weaker than the individual human back then. Individual human back then is carrying spears, can literally fight for its own life. Humans today mostly can't do that. And the same with those wolves, right? These wolves could live in the wild. They had their own packs. These dogs cannot live in the wild. Now that we've domesticated them, they're ours, and if they run away, they're actually in big trouble. They don't know how to survive on their own, unlike cats. Cats are still wild animals, by the way. Okay. So the question that I then ask is can we draw an analogy to our tech, right? Can we say that, an individual human right now, we might say that they're very and this is the cartoon picture of a human, right? But, old humans who are like uninfluenced by tech, oh, well, they really know how to think critically, and they know how to like defend their own attention span, and all these nice things. And if we bring technology into it, well, it could go either way. The same way that with the dogs, right? We don't really know if they're our friend or not yet, but over time we start to see that there's a way to make it so. Right? So with our technology, we've very much been separate. As a human that uses a computer, right? And if I shut it, like, I'm still a human again, right? And we might find that over time, well, we start to mesh more intimately with it and eventually become perhaps inseparable. And are we okay with that, right? So these are the kinds of questions that I want to get us warmed up to. And notably, we're inseparable also from our dogs, right? Anyone who's owned a dog, which I haven't, but so in the same way that we co-evolved with dogs, right? The modern human can exist in this way because the dog exists in that way, because we had that partnership that evolved through the millennia. That's how we actually got here, right? And so in the same way that we might become inseparable from our technology, but that's always how it's been, right? The domesticated dog is a technology, okay? We created that. In the same way that this is something that we'll create. We're going to create that partnership, right? And so laying this all out, and also to say that technology is not a physical thing, right? Technology is a process, and it's a process by which we're constructing the reality that we want, right? We're looking around us, we're looking inside of ourselves, and we're figuring out some process that we can create that we think will lead to some better outcome. Okay, so those are just a bunch of preliminaries. How do we want to think about the technological process and the evolutionary process that that's a part of? Yeah, I think that's all there is to say on that. Right, and so if these are three attitudes towards technology, and there was some attitude in the middle here about like what applications do we build, can we even level it up one more and say it's about how do we map our evolution, right? How do we look at this really complex landscape and design the right attractors there, or find attractors and design the right pathways towards them and through them, right? And that could perhaps inform applications, which can get into very concrete things, but I think we need to start with something a little more abstract than what I see often in our discourse. Okay, so that's some setup. I want to name now like three very different concepts that come from different spheres of thought and kind of tie them together in the framing that I've mentioned. So the first concept is Goodhart's law, and these will be basic things for some people, maybe you've never heard of it for other people, so I'm just putting some definitions that I think are relevant. So Goodhart's law says, when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. But by show of hands, how many people have like heard this before? How many people have not heard of this ever? 1, 2. Okay.
I've heard it, but not named Goodhart's law.
Okay, fine. 2.5. Yeah. So this is an important thing. I guess this is like economics or mechanism design is kind of the field where this originates. Yeah, and please interrupt. We'll have a discussion.
I don't really understand what that means. If you could elaborate a little bit on that.
Yep. I feel like there's a need for that. So, the example of this is something like, corporate, and let's have other people jump in too. I think a sphere of minds will.
The example I usually go with is like college applications or SAT scores, where once you set the SAT score as your measure, then everyone will study specifically just to pass the SAT, and then now it's no longer a measure of general college readiness. It's now just a measure of how much did I study for the SAT.
Got it. Yeah.
My favorite example is when the British took over India, there was a problem with cobras. So they said we need to reduce the cobras, so they paid for every cobra that was brought in, every dead cobra, and that became the measure. So people started breeding cobras in order to get paid. And then they realized that's what was happening, so they said, oh, we're not paying for cobras anymore. So everybody that was breeding cobras released all their cobras. And as a result of that being the measure, they doubled like the number of cobras in the country instead of producing it.
These are great examples. Any more examples or questions?
Do you use an example
example of this, it was meant to be sort of a drug heuristic for the health of an economy, and eventually it started to become the concrete measure thereof, with the viability of a policy being measured by how it would improve or how it would improve GDP. Yeah.
And so GDP starting as a measure, like a thing that you just track, but then when it becomes
Heuristic that and then
Yeah.
turning into the metric of the health of an economy.
Yeah, healthcare is awful right now, and I'm in it, and it sucks.
Yep.
Because now it doesn't matter if the patient gets better, it just matters how much profit you make.
Hey,
And I'm not the one getting the cash, so it sucks for me, because I'm the one that's being squeezed. Yeah.
Divorce increases GDP.
Hey.
right.
So do tornadoes and other natural disasters, right?
Yeah, it's economic activity.
So that's the concept, and there's a lot more to say about it, right? Why does this actually happen, right? I think there's a whole interesting talk we could have. It could be its own whole talk, right? But that's the basic idea. Now, a related concept, I see it as related, and this gets more into the biology, Fisherian runaway. Okay, so there was a biologist named Fisher, and came up with this concept of like runaway evolution or runaway selection. And so I have a peacock here. How many people understand this concept and like why the peacock is a good example of it? Anybody familiar with this one? One. Okay. Right, then I'll explain this. So peacocks, the males in particular, have these really large plumes of feathers, right? What are the feathers for? Right. So now let's think about the evolution. If you're a male, right, and you can grow bigger feathers, you attract more females, right? That's how this works. So if evolution is going to unfold, right, and you're going to have mutations and so on, it sounds like it would be a good idea for the males to grow bigger feathers, right, devote more resources to that, gather more food, and when the body digests the food, it's like, where should I put it? Well, if I have extra calories, I'll put those calories towards growing a bigger tail, right? That's actually like the thing that the selection selects for. So what you end up with are these peacocks that just have like gigantic tails, and these are actually not adaptive. Like they don't help really with anything useful, right? They slow the bird down. It can't fly or walk or run, however it would. And so this is actually, in a way, this is adaptive for the. It's adaptive for the sexual selection, but maladaptive for the natural selection, right? So natural selection is like survival of the fittest, right? Whoever can survive, find resources and so on. That's natural selection. So natural selection and sexual selection are related but different because they both have something to do with being able to survive and reproduce. But natural selection just says, am I healthy enough to survive and reproduce, right? As in, have I not died yet? Have I continued living, getting food, and so on? So that's like a necessary condition, natural selection. But then sexual selection says, okay, you survived and you're healthy enough to reproduce, but did you reproduce, right? Did you actually win that mating game? Okay, and so you can be the case that you're healthy enough to reproduce, but you don't, and that's because you didn't win at this other game of like attraction and courtship and so on. So these tails are this nice example of something that sits right at the boundary. These two things are very correlated, right? They're supposed to be. They're supposed to be that if you're more fit, you're better at surviving, that should be attractive to mates, right? And so your fitness in the natural selection would also influence your fitness in the sexual selection, right? That's what it's supposed to be, right? But when you get things like this, where it's like, okay, no, I'm just gonna like show off, because that's what this is. It's showing off that like, oh, I'm so rich that I can afford to like grow a large tail, right? That's basically, this is like an expensive car, is what that is. And so it's actually now less adaptive in the natural selection sense, right? You're more likely to get hunted by a predator, but you're taking that risk because you're like, oh, but like, this is so sexy that I have this. Like, that's why you're doing it. So that's this trade-off that you're making. But what you now see is like there aren't that many peacocks anymore, right? Like peacocks as a whole kind of lose here because they had to choose like what signal are they going to use to like attract mates, and they happened to choose one, or like maybe it chose them or something, but like that's the signal they arrived at, and so like as a species they're just not as adaptive, right? They're doing this wasteful thing, and so in a way like I see these as kind of the same thing, right? They had a measure that became a target, right? Where this, like, at first it was a measure of like, oh, how much extra resources has this thing gathered, but now it became a target, and now they're actually wasting resources on it. So, so that's the relationship there, right? And like, I want to think about technology in that lens. Yeah, we'll try to tie it together in the end, but this is just like some basic things, or okay. Now one more thing about, unrelated from the last two. Those two kind of had a pair. This is just like different. So there was a guy named Chesterton. He wrote an essay, and he was trying to talk about like when should we intervene in complex systems. And with technology, that's like very much what we're asking is like we have a lot of means to intervene, but like where should we do so? And so the example he gives is a fence, right? You're in the middle of a field, and let's say you just bought a new lot of property, and on this property you find a fence like this, and at first cut it doesn't seem like it's really doing anything. And you're just like, well, I think I'll tear down this fence. I want to do something else with that land. Actually, yeah, sorry. How many people have heard of Chesterton's fence? Okay, maybe a few. I'll just, for completeness, finish the story. Chesterton says, if you tell me that you don't see the use of the fence, I should not let you tear it down. I should only let you tear it down if you tell me that you do see the use of the fence. You do know why it was there. And even despite knowing why it was there, you still want to tear it down. If you can explain all that, then I'll let you tear it down. Because how do you know that this wasn't actually doing something, that it was keeping these cattle from reaching this part of the land or something, right? That if you don't know, there's a risk that you prematurely make a decision that you can't undo, and you could land in some trouble. Good enough? Right. Okay, so 3 like kind of easy enough concepts once you understand them, but now like how do they tie together? I was gonna give a few examples now of like different situations I see where I think that we could intervene if we wanted to. Maybe not right now, but maybe sometime in the future, the technology will be there that we could intervene. And
Intervene to do what?
to change our course of evolution in some way. Right, so intervening on the human biology itself, biotech, neurotech, intervening on the processes in society, like, how we do news media, how we put AI into things, how we build our institutions. Yeah, intervening in a lot of things that we want to make a better future, not a worse one. So, okay, and so in a way I see these as like fences that we might be about to tear down, right? Doing things to our bodies, changing our genetics. I also see them as, in a way, like, these are all about wealth gains, you see, right? Building all this technology, it's really an economic thing. It's like, if I build this, I'll make more money. But have we made profit into a metric that's not measuring the right thing anymore, right? Are we Goodharting ourselves? Are we Fishering ourselves? So those are the reasons that I've kind of brought these things in. I don't know if that's very clear yet. But here are some like really strawman examples that I'm putting up, just things that I'm trying to think through. And what I want you guys to help me do is like come up with more examples, or help me critique some of these ones, or critique this entire thing. All right, so that's what the exercise will be. So I'm just giving examples of like how I would start approaching these exercises. Well, this is maybe kind of a weird one. So I thought about the human appendix. And this is like, in a sense, like a very clear evolutionary thing where we're just like, we don't need it anymore, right? It's like it's part of your intestines, and I'm not sure which part of medicine you work in, but like this thing sometimes causes problems. Sometimes we want to take it out. But a question I might ask is like, what if we had the genetic technology available that you could just make a gene edit and like humans won't have these things anymore? Okay, I don't know if you could ever do that, but if we could, like, it sounds attractive, maybe, right? It's like a cheap thing that you just put in, and no one will ever again have that problem. There's so many deaths per year that you'll just eliminate. Hospital, beds would get freed up. Like, my dad went to the emergency room with appendicitis, right? And like his life was in danger for some period of time. That ICU bed was like, I don't know, it's like a pretty minimal thing, but like it actually takes resources. So I don't know, maybe it's nice. But again, do you understand why it was there, right? What's it going to cost you to take it down? What's the risk that you take in by, medicine also would say do no harm, right? So should you actually do that? Again, just raising a question, right? Another one, trauma, depression, anxiety. I think we usually label these as like problems. I don't know if I agree that these are a problem, although I've suffered from them, so I can also say it is a problem. But if we had neurotechnology available that says, okay, well, I've got the answer for you. I have a little EEG headset or an ultrasound headset that you can put on, and we will essentially surgically remove your depression or remove your anxiety. Okay, what's the catch? Should we actually do this or not? There's a book that I came across, I haven't read all of it yet, Good Reasons for Bad Emotions. Okay, so the notion that trauma is actually doing something, right? It's there to, whatever it's there to do, right? Repress a memory of something that's painful, or even if it's not such a big trauma, but just all these little patterns that you pick up that actually helped you move through situations. And so how do I want to say that that's a bad thing, right? That's just something you've picked up. And that if someone is exhibiting some kind of self-limiting belief or something, it actually helped them in a lot of cases. And so if I just say that I'm going to remove that, but they haven't learned the new thing that gets them through the more general case of life, it may not be so simple to just say that we're going to remove it. And yet I feel like I'm worried that we're about to do that, all right? So again, do you understand why the fence was there? Before you tear it down, what does it mean? Yeah, I think, same thing for, diversity of sexuality and gender. Like, if you're a biologist, if you're studying evolution, maybe you would say, like, this thing didn't serve a purpose, right? This is a bug in evolution because 2 gay partners don't produce children. So, like, natural selection should not have selected for that, allegedly, right? Except that we have it, and it seems to be, growing more, or at least people being more open about it. So you could ask, like, is this actually serving a purpose, right? And I'm not saying that anyone's trying to, like, get rid of it, but, like, that's another case to just try to understand a little bit better, right? We talked about peacocks. This one, I didn't write as much about this one, but I think in a way it's very much tied to the economics of technology, right? We really want money. Like, we need money, even more than that we need it to survive, right? Like, do we have enough abundance to take care of our material needs? That's not why we need money anymore. I claim of course we still have, people in poverty, and, reducing scarcity would be great, having more prosperity would be great. But I would suspect that perhaps a lot of the people who are trying to make all this money, they're actually doing it because they want partners, right? And money's actually really good for that. Okay, so is it possible that in our race for technology and our race to make more money off of it, and the mating choices that are in fact driving that, okay, the fact that men are playing into something and women are playing into something, and I know I'm being a little controversial here, that's just that's what I'm intending to do, that if we wanted to be a little less greedy, a little less profit motivated, maybe we'd have to start looking into this. And so is that a Goodharting that we've not realized that we've fallen into, but we might want to reconsider it a bit? But if we were to tear it down or try to, arrange a social program, I don't know how you would even do this, but if you were to try to, rewire culture a bit to sort of, now religions did this, right? Every stage of culture has in a way been trying to advance us beyond some more primal drives to restrain ourselves a little bit more for the sake of something greater, right? And at every step, right, we have made progress, but we've also left some things behind. So, this seems like kind of the one that I think we're facing, or it's some of the few that we're facing. And yeah, the question is, would we want to do anything or not? Okay, well, yeah, so there's a bunch of stuff. Yeah, what I want to do the rest of the time is like think about any of these examples that were interesting to you, or come up with different examples. Yeah, pick whichever one or ones that you find interesting. And sort of put up a story. Put up like, okay, here's something that's a little bit funny. It seems like a bug, or it seems like a problem. How did it get here, right? Can I actually understand what this is doing? Can I ask whether we still want it, whether it's worth doing something about or not? Should we tear down the fence? So that's sort of like the first option, is just like come up with something there. The second option is like deepen this entire theory. Like respond to any part of this, crystallize it, or expand on it, poke holes, find new directions that we can go in, any of that. That's kind of what I have for now. If there's any questions for the group right now, like raise them now. Otherwise, if people want to just like chat about stuff, decide if there's anything interesting to them, we can separate and come back in about 10, 15 minutes. I'll do some polls and see if people are ready. And then we'll, so we have about a half an hour left. So I'm thinking is like, we'll just break out, people can chat about stuff, and then I'll poll like when we're ready, and we'll just come back and we'll talk as a group. Does that sound good? Anything that people want to say like right now?
Could you go back to the examples?
Any which one, or? You just want to scroll through them?
Yeah.
Sure. I could also leave these up, and you can come up and flip through if you want to.
Yeah. I think this is kind of like for everyone, just to sort of get the ideas jogging.
I have one thing that I've been thinking about that to me feels like very much like the Goodhart law. I don't know if Chesterton's fence applies, but in my mind it's like, oh, we need to intervene. So I could throw this topic out and see if anybody is interested in joining in on it, and see if anybody else has a different topic they want to join in on. But the topic is, so we're talking about AI, right? And this idea of like, oh, AI is going to get out of control and go everywhere. Well, my thought is that we already have a form of AI that is already out of control and has taken over the world. So to me, the corporation is a form of artificial intelligence. It continues to persist beyond the life of people. It's made up of information. People have to follow it to stay. And it is kind of has to be a programming bug, which is kind of like cancer. It's for profit only with endless growth, right? So I don't know, to me, that's like, once that measure is there and we don't have an intervention to ever, rein it in, at some point, everything will be, like the corporations are kind of displacing almost everything. And all of them are kind of geared to consuming all of our resources and leaving us with nothing.
Healthcare is already there. I'm just gonna say it right now, it's awful.
Yeah, I would add that, basically saying that, AI doesn't really follow human evolution, and it's also doesn't follow necessarily what everybody wants. It only follows what individuals that are running the corporations want or desire for their own profitability. So to think of it as being a process of natural selection, or even as a group thought as a whole, is probably incorrect. It's really just what certain individuals think they can capitalize on is what's being pushed into the artificial intelligence world, not a natural process.
One thing I'd argue about the corporation thing is like the corporation is the AI.
Yeah.
Is that if you have individuals and you say, hey, I've become the CEO, I want to steer things in a different direction. Hey, maybe this is, killing the earth is not a good idea.
Yeah.
Maybe profit is not a good idea. Well, because it exists within the constraints of the program, that CEO is out and is replaced with one that follows
correct.
it.
That's
So
exactly what
at some point, like, the people that make up the corporation no one's in charge. You know, because if they don't follow the way that the charter was established, then they will no longer be in the corporation and have no influence.
And those are the rules of corporation.
Right. And so like the intervention is, hey, why did we ever allow endless growth, you know, and profit only? You know, like in the beginnings of corporations, there were some corporations that said, no, you had to serve a certain purpose to continue to maintain your charter, you know? And at some point, and I don't know at what point that happened or why, Chesterton, right? You know, at what point did those, that like, you know, like I think about, you know, like the 3 laws of robotics, says we can't, someone took out those laws that said, you know, you can't, you know, harm people. And I don't know why.
First, couple comments. One, this would be a great topic. If we are going to do breakout groups, you can see what the mood is, but great breakout group topic, right? Corporate governance and like profit motive, right? That could be one. The second reaction, just a little hint, I think it had something to do with Milton Friedman, who was this economist, I think in Chicago, and there was this Friedman doctrine, right, that the purpose of a corporation is to maximize profit for shareholders. And like, you know, it seems that when he wrote that, that kind of like changed the opinion, it changed the zeitgeist around like, you know, corporations being a social good. So like, no, they really just exist for shareholders. But I don't know, because does one academic, you know, writing a nice essay actually on its own change things? Because there's also like laws about this, right? So like, it's kind of all mixed in, right? Yeah, that would just be like my hint. I want to know what the group wants to do now. Are people wanting to think by themselves a bit, find, you know, do what Patrick did, you know, propose an idea, attract conversation partners? People wanting to.
Well, so if we're talking about co-evolution of humans and their technologies, one thing I'd be interested in thinking about a little bit more in this context is sort of like a rough approximation of Conway's law, where
What's Conway's law?
so that is a system designed by a given organization is going to reflect the communication patterns of that organization, or like more roughly, sometimes you'll also see like the idea of the organizational hierarchy or the way that the organization interacts with itself inside of that pattern. So there are a bunch of like ways that this plays out. One of the first ones is if you have 4 groups working on a compiler, you'll get a 4-pass compiler. The structure of any system designed by an organization is isomorphic to the structure of the organization. You might know this is a car industry joke. You can see the organization chart of a car company in the dashboard and also see whether the steering wheel team hates the gear stick team. Yeah, so this kind of fuses well with what you're talking about, whatever we fear from AGI may also have something to do with whatever we fear about the organizations that are currently managing that transition. Maybe. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, Conway's law and organizations. Also, great opportunity to give a plug. So Claire is having a talk tomorrow. Is it? That I think is a wonderful concept and in a way very much a mirror image of what we talked about here. If you also want to take the opportunity, feel free.
Dead ends in the technological evolutionary tree, why specific technologies get discarded and what causes them to get revisited. When's your talk? 8:30 tomorrow, PM, I think. Yeah, right, down here. Yeah. It was at it last minute. Yeah. Anyway, what else have we got? Anyone wanna? Anyone?
My feeling is that I want to also get a poll. I can take this opportunity to get my own feedback. How would people rate, you know, what this did for them? Like, how was this for you? Was this like very general, you know, 20,000 feet, like, don't really know what to do, I'm getting some of those vibes? Was this like, oh, I learned a couple new concepts, like, where did people get, you know, where did it get your ears spinning a bit, and where did it kind of like leave you like, not really sure?
I'm glad you explained some of the concepts that you had on the slides and that you asked about it, because I would have been completely lost if you would have been like, everybody knows this, let's go on.
Is there a particular thing that you're grappling with that led you to think of these concepts?
Good question. I think
Are you worried about AGI?
not exactly. Yeah, I think I gave a couple reactions to that. So one is like, how do I want to spend my time? Right? Like, I think right now I roughly work on like capabilities type stuff for AI, right? It's like, okay, that's fine. But I also see these people who are worried about AGI, and I'm like, well, do I agree with them? Right, just because you mentioned it, sorry, I don't mean to put you out there. Right, but it's like, yes, I know those people too, and I'm like, I don't know if I believe them. And so I've kind of felt like, I don't see like good things to work on. I don't see good ways to spend our time that seem well thought through and productive. So this has really been for me like, okay, how do I think more clearly about just like, what am I doing in the grand scheme of things? It's mostly what it was. And like, am I doing things that are just locally like good for me, or that are like good for the people who are paying me to do it? But like,
So it sounds like a bit of an anxiety of doing the wrong thing, like putting a lot of effort into something that turns out to be a mistake or causing unexpected problems.
yeah, like, there's a bit of perfectionism in me. It's like,
Yeah.
but I want to avoid mistakes. I don't know that any of the mistakes are like that bad, but on the flip side, there's also like wanting to just do something good. Like,
This actually did remind me of another possible example, I don't know, and also it's very specific, so I'm not exactly sure if people will have the context for it. Oh, well, I mean, actually, okay, this one actually a different one that actually coming up. Most people would be comfortable with, but health insurance is tied to employment. Our system ties healthcare insurance to our employment, and in modern, I mean, that was created initially. That system was created initially because people wanted employers offered insurance as a perk and to attract jobs, to attract people to sign with them, and so it was created as a good thing and people appreciated having health insurance provided by the employer. That's a very good thing, a very good perk of working. But what that system creates nowadays is that if you lose your job, you lose your health insurance at the time when you most need it. And so in modern context, that seems like a phenomenally bad way of doing this. And so that would be the sort of thing where it's like, maybe it's something that we wouldn't want to, this is something we would want to remove or to intervene. And then so to get back to what you're saying, when I think about like, in the 1950s or whenever people started doing healthcare insurance as as offered by the workplace, I'm sure it felt like a really good thing, and probably people worked very hard to make this a thing because they genuinely believed that they were trying to help people get insurance, and so they put a lot of effort into creating this. And now, however many years later, now we realize, this was a phenomenally bad way of doing it. All of that effort that people put in, they thought they were doing such a good thing. Turns out it has created this a very bad system. It's very confusing, and now no one can fix it because it's just pervasive in the entire healthcare industry. And now we need lots of more effort to undo that. So I think does that describe a little bit of your anxiety? Like, I don't want to put so much effort into something I think is right, and then 100 years later, it turns out it was a fondly bad system.
in a way, I mean, it's a great example, right? I want to respond to that on a couple levels. The first thing is that, so the book I read recently talks about these kinds of things as progressing in stages. That every problem that we solve, it creates a new problem,
Yeah.
And that doesn't necessarily mean that it made it worse, right? It could have, on the net, made things better,
Yeah.
but it exposes you to new problems,
Yeah.
and that's okay. And so, you know, a question that I think is also a general question is like, how do we assess when we've done net good? Right? Like in your case, I'm actually not sure. Like, you know, overall, do more people have health insurance now than 50 years ago? Right? Overall, do fewer people die of particular things that insurance tends to prevent? Like, so yeah, so that's just like one framing I would put around it. But yeah, I'd say that addresses the type of thing. Like, yeah, I think that the thing that like, because we do have more time potentially, but also just the thing in general that I want to think about, and perhaps this group is interested in, is like, I was thinking of expanding this talk into something that's more of like institutional design.
I don't know what that is.
I mean, basically, it's just all of these questions. It's like, let's suppose that, so this health insurance example is kind of a nice one. You know, there was a problem. We maybe solved the problem in some way by attaching insurance to your job, and then, but now we have this problem. Like, the institutional design thing is like, how did they get that to happen? That you get insurance as part of your job? Like, who started that? Like, is that by law making it? Doesn't exactly seem so. Was it just like a social movement? Like, what cultural and institutional trend like made that happen? If that makes sense. Maybe I can. Right, and then the next thing would be like, how would we change that? Or if we think that
design incentives so that.
Yeah, like if we now think that, okay, this might have been a good idea at one time, but it's no longer a good idea, or now we have a better idea now, how would we actually change it, right? Do you pass laws? Do you like start a nonprofit? Like, yeah, so that's kind of like the question is how do you affect change? Institution design, that, the other way is to look at like the words themselves, like institutions are like things that arrange collective behavior. So, you know, if you have just a, you know, however many millions of people in, you know, in the state, and you just had people just doing their own thing, what would come out of that? Versus you put certain things in that kind of steer it in a certain direction. You put police force, that's an institution. You put a government, that's an institution. A hospital or a healthcare system, like all these are institutions of different kinds, right? And some of them are like publicly owned, some of them are more private. But anything that you expect to, yeah, cause people to act in certain ways that that you hope will benefit everybody. And like the thing that's hard about this is like, you can think about it as like, oh, you know, if I were to design the perfect system or design the better system, what would it look like? And you know, you'll never get a perfect one, but you might get better ones. But then this deeper question of, okay, even though I can conceive what the system would be, how do you actually get it to happen?
And how do you know that you're not making enough any problems? You're just not aware of it now.
Yeah, and that's a different question.
Yeah.
Right, that's more of like, is this even a good system? Right, should we actually do this? The next part is like, if we would do this, or even if once we figure that out, that we think it's good, right? It's good enough for now. It's better than what we have now. And yeah, like I think a trend that's starting to come out is that this is not just a question of like what we usually think about it as like, okay, well you can like write legislation, right? You can draft a bill and you can send it to your congressman, and if enough people do this, like, you know, there's ways, and think tanks and lobbyists basically, this is what they do, right? They write legislation and they try to get it in front of people who will sign it, right? And that's, or vote for it. And that's like an okay way to think about it, right? But this other way to think about it that I think is just starting to come online is like, you just have to like change culture, not just, but like this is actually a result of what culture you have, and that if we would have people who were more emotionally in tune, had better educational opportunities, like blossom more into higher orders of thinking and higher orders of feeling. But this is how you would actually do institution design because of Conway's law, because of, it's a little different, I guess, but the end product that you get out, or the end process you get out, is just a reflection.
Technically, we've entered a 10-minute no man's land, and in 9.5 minutes, it's his class. So you guys do whatever you want, and then 9.5 minutes that happens.
Yep, 6:50. Okay,
There.
I'm done.
Thank you.